Week number 14 of the 2025 fantasy football season kicked off last night on Thursday Night Football with the Cowboys losing to the Detroit Lions in Detroit. In today's video, I'm going to help you guys set your lineups at the wide receiver position, breaking down my top 40 wide receiver rankings and tiers for week number 14 of the 2025 fantasy football season. Hopefully, we can get all of you guys that W so you can get into the playoffs, or maybe this week you're looking to secure your bye for the playoffs. Before we get into things, though, I would like to ask that if you are new to the channel and you don't enjoy anything, make sure to hit that subscribe button down below like it owes you some money. Hope you guys do enjoy today's video. So without further ado, let's get into my top 40 wide receiver rankings and tiers for week number 14 of the 2025 fantasy football season. We begin in tier number 1 with my must-start wide receiver ones: Jackson Smith-Njigba, Jamar Chase, Puka Nacua, Rashee Rice, Davante Adams, Chris Olave, Nico Collins, and Jalen Waddle. Now, tier number 1, the wide receiver ones do look light this week because on Thursday Night Football, the Dallas Cowboys played up against the Detroit Lions, and 4 of my top 12 wide receivers played in that game. I had CeeDee Lamb, wide receiver 3, George Pickens, wide receiver 6. Obviously, that is not going to age too well. Amon-Ra St. Brown, wide receiver 8, and Jameson Williams, wide receiver number 9. We do not talk about the players that already played Thursday Night Football in these rankings videos, because if they already played, you can't just magically change your lineup and throw them in there. So JSN, wide receiver 1, going up against the Atlanta Falcons in Atlanta, the 13th best matchup for wide receivers on a per game basis. You're playing JSN every single week regardless of the matchup. I get he scored just 4 PPR points last week, but prior to that, he was on a gigantic stretch of being a top 9 wide receiver basically every single game. He has finished outside the top 12 just 3 times this season. JSN is as much of a lock as it gets into your lineup, and I don't need to sit here and give this guy the Gawk 9000 special for you to know that he should be in your lineup. Then we got Jamar Chase going up against the Buffalo Bills in Buffalo, a very important game for both of these teams, probably one of the most entertaining games of the week, at least on paper. The 22nd best matchup for wide receivers on a per-game basis, just like JSN. Jamar Chase is a must-start wide receiver every single week. Now, I understand that Jamar Chase hasn't had as smooth of sailing as JSN this season. There have been some rough waters, but at the end of the day, Jamar Chase, Joe Burrow, a connection like peanut butter and jelly, so Jamar Chase has got to be in your lineup. Then we got Puka Nacua going up against the Arizona Cardinals. Now, Puka Nacua has been on the struggle bus a little bit recently. Now, he hasn't been struggling so much that he's scoring like 3 fantasy points or something, but he is struggling compared to the expectations that we put on him. Wide receiver 23 last week, 15 the game prior, 17 the game prior to that, and 16 the game prior to that. Besides that, though, earlier on the season, he was basically printing top 6 games every single week. So while Puka Nacua has fallen ever so slightly, he is going to rise. He's going to have big games. He's going to be the wide receiver 1 at points this season. So in the 19th best matchup for wide receivers on a per game basis, again, all of these guys, they don't really need the biggest introduction ever. Like when you're watching a UFC fight and Bruce Buffer's like, the one, the only, right? And he's screaming about these guys. We don't have to do that for, the obvious guys in this tier. Then we got Rashee Rice going up against the Houston Texans. In terms of a matchup at the wide receiver position, this is actually the 4th worst matchup. But again, once you are talking about guys like JSN, Jamar Chase, you're talking about CeeDee Lamb, Puka Nacua, Rashee Rice, right? You're playing these guys regardless of the matchup. Back-to-back games as a top 6 wide receiver. He has just 1 game this season outside of the top 12. So while the Houston Texans matchup may be scary, if there was a quarterback that could overcome a matchup like that, it would be Patrick Mahomes. Then we got Davante Adams going up against the Arizona Cardinals. Now, Davante Adams just lives inside of the end zone. He lives rent-free inside of the end zone. He has scored a touchdown in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 straight games or more coming out the bye week. And the game prior to the bye week, the man scored 3 touchdowns up against the Jaguars. He has 14 total touchdowns through 12 games of the season. Davante Adams is a must-start wide receiver every single week, back-to-back weeks as a top 9 wide receiver. And while it is frustrating for Puka Nacua owners, Davante Adams is going to continue to put up humongous numbers. Then we got Nico Collins going up against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in Tampa Bay. Now, Chris Olave could have had a gigantic game last Sunday up against the Dolphins had he have brought in that would have been his 2nd touchdown catch. It kind of just didn't go his way. Actually, the ball did go his way, but he didn't catch it correctly. So technically, things didn't go his way. The dice roll didn't work out for him, but he was wide open. He was essentially wide open when the ball hit him, and he dropped it. It is what it is, though. He was the wide receiver number 18. Chris Olave is a very reliable, high-end wide receiver 2 type of guy. Not a guy you really ever project to be the wide receiver 1 on a weekly basis, just due to the fact that I don't love Tyler Shuck. I don't love the Saints offense as a whole, but the Buccaneers are a great option. It's the 11th best matchup for wide receivers on a per game basis. So if there ever was going to be a game for him to absolutely pop off here, it would be up against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Last time out up against the Bucs, he was the wide receiver number 24 with Spencer Rattler under center. Then we move to Nico Cousin. Let's go Bowling Collins going up against the Kansas City Chiefs in Kansas City. In terms of a matchup on a per game basis, this is going to be the 20th best matchup for wide receivers. Now, Nico Collins has been kind of all over the place this season. He hadn't really found consistency early on, but over the last 4 games, he's been the wide receiver 10, 38, 4, and 5. I understand the offensive line sucks ass. I understand that CJ Stroud isn't the most consistent quarterback either, but this is a game where they're going to have to throw the ball. It's the 20th best matchup for wide receivers. And Nico Collins, again, he's another one of these guys that you're just starting every single week. Then we got Jalen Waddle away, Jalen Waddle away till the very next day, going up against the New York Jumbo Jets in MetLife. Now, the last 2 games out of Jalen Waddle have been brutal. Wide receiver 49 last week prior to the bye in week 11 up against the Commanders in Spain, wide receiver 41. But without Tyreek Hill for a majority of the season, Jalen Waddle has been a very consistent piece. Typically, as a Dolphins fan, I will note that Jalen Waddle typically bends over the Jets defense. Typically, Jalen Waddle comes to play up against the New York Jumbo Jets. Now, I understand Tua Tagovailoa, Tua turning the ball over, hasn't looked the best as of recently, but this also is not a great Jets defense, right? This defense isn't the best. They just got put on a t-shirt by the Atlanta Falcons. I understand they ended up winning that game, but this is the 23rd best matchup for wide receivers on a per-game basis. In a matchup that Jalen Waddle always succeeds against, I'm going to bet on that success yet again. Now we move into tier number 2 with my high-end wide receiver 2s with Ladd McConkey, T. Higgins, A.J. Brown, Michael Wilson, Michael Pittman Jr., as well as Emeka Egbuka. Now, the fact that Justin Herbert, the pervert, did have surgery on his non-throwing hand does definitely concern me. Now, it's much better to have the left hand, have to have surgery on it compared to the right hand for Justin Herbert, as he is a right-handed quarterback. But it also isn't the best news ever that they had to have surgery on his left hand in the middle of the season. Now, he is expected to play up against the Philadelphia Eagles, and the Eagles do have a good enough defense, but this is the 17th best matchup for wide receivers on a per-game basis. I just think that the offense is going to try to keep things easy for Justin Herbert with the messed up hand. They're not going to have him chucking piss missiles up there to Quentin Johnston, up to Keenan Allen. They're going to try to keep it simple, the KISS method, to keep it simple, stupid, and I think we're going to see a lot of easy targets going the way of Ladd McConkey, thus propelling him to potentially finish as a top 12 receiver. Then we got T. Higgins going up against the Buffalo Bills in Buffalo. In terms of a matchup, facing toe-to-toe with the Buffalo Bills is the 22nd best matchup for wide receivers. This game is expected to be one of the highest scoring games of the week. T. Higgins is coming off the concussion. Obviously, T. Higgins is a guy that can be hit or miss, right? He doesn't have the highest floor due to the fact that Jamar Chase is in the offense. But again, just like with Jamar Chase, right? Him and T. Higgins and Joe Burrow have a elite connection, right? So if you expect this to be a high-scoring game like I do, you expect there to be a lot of throwing. I would expect there to be a lot of targets falling the way of T. Higgins. Then we got A.J. Brown going up against the L.A. Superchargers in SoFi Stadium. In terms of a matchup at the wide receiver position, this is the worst matchup, but when it comes to fantasy football, I say this every single season, I probably say this every single week. In fantasy football, I utilize the NBA Jam on fire strategy weekly, right? A.J. Brown doesn't just have one great game, right? He has been a top 5 wide receiver in back-to-back games, and he was the wide receiver 1 last week. He's building up momentum. He is on fire. You are not sitting a wide receiver who has had that many big games in a row, despite the fact that the matchup might be tough. Again, could A.J. Brown completely shit the bed? Yes. That's A.J. Brown's MO. He loves doing that. But with 10 plus targets in 3 straight games, there's no way. You would need the SEAL Team 6 to be called for me to take him out of my lineup. Then we got Michael Wilson going up against the LA Rams in terms of a matchup. This is going to be the 16th best matchup for wide receivers on a per game basis. Now, Michael Wilson without Maserati Marv. There's no Marvin Harrison Jr. this week. Wide receiver 1 up against the 49ers in week 11. Wide receiver 9 up against the Jaguars in week number 12. 15 plus targets in both of those games. Over 115 receiving yards in both spots. Now, could Michael Wilson go back and potentially do what he did last week as the wide receiver 51? Definitely, but I think on sheer volume alone, based on the connection he has with Jacoby Brissett, when there is no Marvin Harrison Jr., there's just no way you could talk me into ranking him lower than this. Then we got Michael Pittman Jr. going up against the Jacksonville Jaguars in Duval. In terms of a matchup at the wide receiver position, this is going to be the 15th best matchup. Now, Michael Pittman Jr. is the definition of boom or bust. Typically, he is either on top of the world, dropping a deuce on your opponent, or he's hitting you with the Cleveland Steamer special and he scores like 2 fantasy points. Last week, that is exactly what he did. He scored 2 fantasy points as the wide receiver 87. The game prior, he was the wide receiver 24, which is a rare middling game. If you look at other stretches in the season, it's a lot more clear, right? Like wide receiver number 62 in week 10. The week prior, he was the wide receiver 9. The game prior to that, he was the wide receiver 3. So while he is a boom or bust asset, I understand Daniel Jones is playing through injury, but Daniel Jones didn't look super inhibited by that injury, in my opinion, in last week's game. So I expect Daniel Jones to be firing at all cylinders, and I expect Michael Pittman Jr. to get back into the good graces of fantasy owners. Then we got Emeka Egbuka going up against the New Orleans Saints. No Mike Evans this week, though. Chris Godwin is back. He's played the last 2 games. Emeka Egbuka has been down terrible over the last 3 games. He's been the wide receiver 39, 48, and 42 last week. Shout out to Jackie Robinson. Under 10 points in all games. But he's gotten 8 plus targets in all of those games. He has had 8 or more targets now over the last 6 games. So if the targets keep coming his way, more than likely, with the skill set that he possesses, things are more likely to go his way, right? He is very unlikely to get 8 plus targets again and not score at least 10 fantasy points, right? The pendulum will swing more in his direction, and he will have bigger games ahead. So while I definitely don't feel as confident as I would have earlier on in the season, in the 18th best matchup for wide receivers on a per game basis, you are still feeling very confident about Emeka Egbuka, even if the last couple of games have you afraid. You are petrified. Now we move into tier number 3, the low-end wide receiver number 2s with Christian Watson, Courtland Sutton, Alec Pierce, Jacoby Myers, Justin Jefferson, Zay Flowers, and Devontae Smith. Before we break down the tier number 3 of the wide receiver position, as well as the rest of the tiers in today's video, I would like to give you guys a quick word for our friends, our partner over at Underdog. If you're brand new to Underdog, it's time using promo code Notorious or by clicking on the link in the video description. You receive a free pick plus a first-time deposit offer of up to $1,000 in bonus funds, as well as you play $5 to pick'em. You receive an additional $100 in bonus funds or in bonus entries. How does the pick'em work? It's incredibly simple. You make at least 2 picks on the higher or the lower. If those picks hit on the players, you get paid. Now, if you do multiple other picks, then the payout will be higher, but all of the picks need to hit. Make sure you guys do check that out. Promo code Notorious or by clicking on the link in the video description. Now, when it comes to Christian Watson, this week he has a fantastic matchup. He is the 4th best matchup for wide receivers on a per game basis. Now, Christian Watson is another one of these guys that historically has been boom or bust. This season, though, we have seen more consistency. He's gotten 7 plus targets in back-to-back games, and over the last 3 games, he's been a top 12 wide receiver in 2 of 3 games. This is a guy that has the upside to score multiple touchdowns in any given game, especially without Tucker Kraft. The Bears matchup is great. The stars are aligning for back-to-back big performances out of Christian Watson, as on Thanksgiving, he was eating 4 receptions on 10 targets for 80 yards and a touchdown as the wide receiver number 12. And we got Courtland Sutton going up against the Las Vegas Raiders in Viva Las Vegas. Now, I personally was starting to really worry about Courtland Sutton. Prior to the bye, he was not a top 30 wide receiver for 4 straight games. And based upon the fact that Troy Franklin, the Turtle, was going beast mode, like he was the Skittle Man, Marshawn Lynch, I was starting to worry. I started to whimper. I said, you know what? I'm a lot more nervous about Courtland Sutton. And then bada bing, bada boom, step inside the room. Wide receiver 16 last week. 5 receptions on 6 targets for 62 yards and an overtime thriller win up against the Commanders in Landover, Maryland as the wide receiver number 16. He scored a touchdown in that game as well. In terms of a matchup going up against the Viva Las Vegas Raiders, this is the 7th best matchup for wide receivers on a per game basis. So I fully understand being still not 100% optimistic, being a little bit pessimistic on Courtland Sutton based on the fact that he screwed the pooch for a lot of games in a row. If you remember early on in the season, he was a really reliable top 18 wide receiver, and maybe the pendulum has swung back his way. Now, definitely want to be playing him up against the Raiders. Then we got Alec Pierce going up against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, Alec Pierce to me is clearly the wide receiver 2 on this team. Josh Downs does have flashes, and Josh Downs in any given game, let's be honest, can get 3 targets, 2 receptions, 100 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Anyone that's watched Josh Downs play can have seen that happening, right? No one would be that shocked. Obviously, you're shocked in the moment because holy shit, that's crazy, but it's not something that no one could have seen coming, right? It's definitely possible. Now, Alec Pierce, though, gets a lot more of reliable target share. Last week, he only had 5 targets, though 4 receptions for 78 yards and a touchdown. He has scored 18 points in 3 of his last 4 games in PPR. So with the matchup up against the Jaguars that isn't, crazy, it's the 15th best matchup. It's a good matchup. I want Alec Pierce in my lineup because, again, I think Daniel Jones isn't as banged up as people kind of led on to it being, kind of like I did last week, because watching that practice video didn't look the best. Then we got Jakobi Meyers going up against the Indianapolis Colts at home in Duval. Now, Jakobi Meyers has been a top 22 wide receiver in 3 straight games, a touchdown in back-to-back games, 6 touchdowns in 3 straight games. That'd be crazy. 6 targets in 3 straight games. So, again, this is another case of the guy is on fire, NBA Jam style. We are going to keep firing him up. Now, going up against the Indianapolis Colts is also a fruitful matchup. It is the 9th best matchup for wide receivers on a per-game basis. So again, when you have a guy playing as well as we have seen with Jakobi Meyers, we are going to keep believing in him, especially since we don't trust BTJ at all. Now, Parker Washington was limited in practice on Thursday with the hip injury. The hip injury was from fucking our fantasy teams in the ass if you played him last week. Now, if he plays, that does throw a bit of a wrench into this scenario. But again, when a guy's been performing as well as he has, and when we don't trust BTJ, I'm still going to be rocking with him inside of this tier. I might just drop him down a little bit. Then we got Justin Jefferson going up against the left hands up. Who are we? The Commanders. Now, expert consensus rankings have him as the wide receiver 14. He is currently my wide receiver 23. Why is he not ranked higher? Because I don't trust J.J. McCarthy. J.J. McCarthy plays like he went to the School of Blind and Deaf, sponsored by Ray Charles, instead of going to Michigan, where he went to college, right? I understand that, Nick, the Commanders matchup's great. It's the 5th best matchup, Nick. Don't you think that Justin Jefferson could have a good game? Of course he can. He's Justin Jefferson. He's one of the best receivers in the NFL. But how many times are you going to let this guy clobber you with a lock in a sock like you're in prison before you change your opinion, right? Over the last 5 games, he scored 2 fantasy points last week. I know, Nick, that's Max Brosmer. Things will be better with J.J. McCarthy. I think it will be. 9 points, 11 points, and 8 points over the last 4 games, right? Not good. Again, the upside is always the moon with Justin Jefferson, but when the floor is highly questionable, I can't rank him higher than this. Then we got Zay Flowers going up against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, Zay Flowers has been a lot more consistent than I thought he would be this season. Considering what Zay Flowers has been throughout his career, he has actually become a very consistent asset to your fantasy team. But the problem is with how Lamar is playing, I don't really see Zay Flowers having that humongous big game, right? That we know he can have due to how fast he is. He is in the 6th best matchup for wide receivers. But Lamar's coming into the game banged up, going to play, but that's a concern. I think he's going to be fine. And again, the upside is there. I just don't really see it coming to fruition, so that's why I don't have him ranked higher than this. Then we got Devontae Smith going up against the LA Superchargers. Again, brutal matchup. This offense is looking incredibly limp dick. They need to figure something out, but he's gotten 8 targets in back-to-back games, and as of recently, he has at least been consistent. So while deep down in my, in my loins, I don't trust Devontae Smith. And I don't love the matchup. At the same time, he's continued to produce, so you're going to keep starting him. Now we move into tier number 4, which is going to be the high-end wide receiver 3s, beginning with Terry McLaurin, and Khalil Shakir is also in this tier. Now, Jaden Stormy Daniels is going to be back in this game. Now, I know, Nick, you sound like a pussy when you're saying, Nick, you don't think the Commanders should bring Jaden Daniels back because Jaden Daniels, he's healthy, he's good to go. Why wouldn't they play him? Because why risk it? Why risk another injury when there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 games left and you are not making the playoffs? Now, obviously, if they were in the scenario of the Bengals, I get it. I get it much more. I don't get it as much with the Commanders. I get he's going to be fine. It's going to be a little bit scary, I know, and whenever someone gets hurt, at least me, when you see an injury like that, I'm going to be a little bit nervous. First game watching him up against the Vikings, I'm going to be a little bit scared, right? But he's going to be fine. He's going to play. It is what it is. Him and Terry McLaurin were not on the same page. They were not in the same book. They were not in the same Dewey Decimal System throughout the season when they played together. That scares me. Mariota and Terry McLaurin, they exploded last week. Mount Vesuvius, 7 receptions on 14 targets for 96 yards and a touchdown. He has scored a touchdown in back-to-back games. So hopefully, him and Jaden Daniels figured things out. And once that, appears on my screen and it happens, I'm going to feel a lot better. That's why I have him ranked a little bit lower than consensus. Plus, it's the second worst matchup for wide receivers on a per-game basis. Then we got Khalil Shakir. Now, I understand, Nick, Khalil Shakir absolutely sucked last week. He only scored 2 fantasy points, Nick. You told me that Khalil Shakir is a super safe asset, Nick. It's not safe when a guy gets 2 fantasy points. I agree. That was bad. But normally, he's a guy that's going to get you 10 to 14 points and could score maybe 18 if everything goes his way. Last week, that didn't happen against the Steelers, but they steamrolled the Steelers, right? They bent them over a table. The Steelers were never in that game, right? Whereas up against the Bengals, this isn't going to be a certified bully beatdown like that MTV show, right? This should be a close game where they're going to have to throw the football. And while the Bengals defense locked in up against the Baltimore Ravens last week, and while they are technically the 27th best matchup for wide receivers on a per-game basis, I think Khalil Shakir is going to bounce back and become the safe asset that I always thought he was. So I like Khalil Shakir this week a decent amount. Because again, I'm not going to panic after one down game. Then we got tier number 5 with Debo, Troy Franklin, and A.D. Mitchell. Tier 5 is the mid-range wide receiver 3s. Now, Debo, this guy is the king of just kind of not doing all that much throughout the game and then somehow magically, miraculously finding the end zone. He should get 7+ targets, in my opinion here. Brutal matchup, though, so I just pumped the brakes a little bit. Now we got Troy Franklin. Now, I was given the Sukalamink special, the Gawk Gawk 9000 special to Troy Franklin last week. I was talking about how up against the Commanders, Troy Franklin is going to go nuclear. He was going to get a 25 kill streak, Modern Warfare 2, call in the tactical nuke, right? He was going to go bananas. He scores 4 fucking fantasy points, 2 receptions on 3 targets for 21 yards. But the games prior to that, back-to-back games, a top 23 wide receiver. We've seen the ceiling up against Dallas, wide receiver 1, right? So the matchup this week is definitely one that you want to take advantage of. It's the 7th best matchup for wide receivers. I'm definitely more concerned than I was going into last week, but I'm not going to give up on the guy after one down showing. Then we got A.D. Mitchell. Now, A.D. Mitchell was on fire last week. He sparked up. He had 8 receptions on 12 targets for 102 yards and a touchdown. He's had 6+ targets in every single start as a Jet. Tyrod Taylor isn't going to be incredible. No one should be assuming that, but Tyrod Taylor is competent enough to throw him and John Mechie the ball. A.D. Mitchell plays a bunch of snaps and gets a bunch of targets. At the end of the day, while it is still tough deep down to stomach that you're starting a New York Jumbo Jet in your lineup, I, as a Dolphins fan, know that there are going to be multiple times in this game where while the Dolphins defense has locked in, A.D. Mitchell is going to be wide fucking open. Now, it might take till the end of the game, but it will happen. We saw it with Chris Olave. We saw Devon Vele get open, get loose, foot loose, let everything hang loose, right? This is the 25th best matchup for wide receivers. I know for sure if Tyrod can just hit him a couple times he's open, where there's no one within a school zone of the guy, he is going to pay off, especially considering that, again, the Dolphins defense typically wears down later on in the game. Wide receiver 6 last week. I don't expect as good of a game, though, this week. Now we got tier number 6 with Wiki, DJ Moore, DK Metcalf, Chris Godwin, and Greg Dortch, the low-end wide receiver 3s. No Rome Odunze. Props up DJ Moore. Does the fact that they don't have Rome Odunze make DJ Moore a must start? Of course not. If it did, he wouldn't be ranked as my wide receiver 31. But it does make me feel a little bit safer about him. DJ Moore is normally like a YOLO start that, literally his floor is 0 points. We've seen it this season, just a few weeks ago, up against the Giants, right? But his ceiling is very high because deep down, DJ Moore still has it. Unk still got it. So up against the Packers in a game where you would think the Bears would have to throw, maybe they're not as successful at jamming the ball down the throat of the defense like up against the Eagles in the 21st best match for wide receivers. I like DJ Moore here, but again, deep down, you just feel disgusted about putting him in your lineup. And we got DK Metcalf going up against the Baltimore Ravens. He also feels fucking disgusting. Now, the Baltimore Ravens matchup is the 10th best for wide receivers on a per-game basis. DK Metcalf has been downright terrible over the last couple of weeks. He started off the season fine. He kind of caught his strides week 6, week 8, and then after that, it's been all downhill. Ravens matchup is good, though. Problem is, I just don't really trust the Steelers' passing attack, so how can I really be all in on Metcalf? Then we got Chris Godwin going up against the New Orleans Saints in terms of a matchup at the wide receiver position. This is the 18th best one. Chris Godwin was wide open in the end zone, dropped the touchdown. Very unlike Chris Godwin. I expect him to get ramped up even further with the amount of snaps this week. And while I'm definitely more pro Egbuka, I could see Chris Godwin outscoring him this week. I know I probably said Greg Dortch at the beginning, but Greg Dortch was ruled out while I was recording, so we're not going to be talking about Greg Dortch because, spoiler alert, he's not playing. Tier number 7, this is going to be the last tier, the YOLO wide receiver 4s. BTJ, Romeo Doubs, Quentin Johnston, Jaden Higgins, John Mechie, Xavier Worthy, Devon Vele, and Luther Burden. BTJ right now, I don't trust him worth jack shit. I don't trust him at all, but one of these days, he's bound to have a good game because he's talented enough. That's kind of my take on him. I know that sounds sad. Sounds bad based on where you drafted him, but that's just how I feel. Ooh, Romeo Doubs going up against the Bears. Kind of out on Romeo Doubs as of right now because it seems like he ended up seeing Christian Watson take the crown as the wide receiver 1 in this offense. But the matchup's juicy against the Bears, and he can score. Then we got QJ going up against the Eagles. You never really trust QJ because it's basically Russian roulette at the wide receiver position outside of Ladd McConkey. But Quentin Johnston has that big upside. Then we got Jaden Higgins going up against the Kansas City Chiefs. In Kansas City, I wish that the Texans would push further onto the agenda of getting Jaden Higgins the ball more, giving him more snaps, because if he was the clear wide receiver 2 in terms of snaps weekly, if he was playing a lot more snaps, then you would feel even better about him. This is the 20th best matchup for wide receivers on a per-game basis. He's been a top 35 wide receiver in 4 straight games, top 26 in 3 of 4 games, has touchdown upside. That's what we like in that range. Then we got John Mechie going up against the Dolphins. Now, just like the Dolphins matchup, which is MIA, he was missing in action last week. 4 receptions on 8 targets for 19 yards, a touchdown in the prior 2 games before that. Again, he's going to get 7+ targets, so he has that touchdown upside. Then we got Xavier Worthy. Xavier Worthy has definitely been more of a floor play as of recently. He hasn't really gotten those crazy effort. Xavier Worthy's out there somewhere, targets that he used to get earlier on in the season. He hasn't scored a touchdown since week 6, but with the speed that he has, I would argue that he's due. Tough matchup, though, up against the Texans. Then we got Devon Vele going up against the Bucks. Now, Devon Vele, I talked about in the waiver wire video, how he you smell that? He kind of reeks of fool's gold, right? He kind of reeks of the guy, you fall for the trap, you step on the trap, step on the crack, break your mama's back type deal, and it doesn't work for him. But he was the wide receiver 7 last week, and he's had 7+ targets in back-to-back games. I'm not claiming Tyler Shuck is legitness. I'm not claiming Tyler Shuck is that guy, pal. But if you can get 7 targets in back-to-back games, and you're playing up against a Tampa Bay defense that allows the 11th most points to wide receivers on a per-game basis, I'm willing to take that deep shot and roll the dice on him. Then we got Luther Burden. Now, I think Luther Burden should be seeing more targets now without Rome Odunze this week. but that still isn't even a guarantee. To be honest with you, we might just see more Olamide Zacchaeus. Maybe we see more Colston Loveland percolating, or even worse, Cole Kmet does a bunch of shit and just nothing. He has a good game, but it helps no one. So, while I do like Luther Burden, I am hesitant to truly bang the drum for him even without Rome. So, thank you guys all so much for watching. If you did enjoying, make sure you guys hit that subscribe button like it owes you some money. Leave a like on today's video to help me out a ton. If you want to follow me on Twitter or X, please do so at NotoriousFantasy. Hope you guys all have a great rest of your guys' day. Check out one of the videos on the screen if you haven't seen them already. Love you a long time. As always, goodbye.